Dr. Amos Wilson, Dr. John Henry Clarke, Ivan Van Sertima, Dr. Ben, Chancellor Williams, who wrote The Destruction of Black Civilization, who saved my life.
The major documents on the extension of global white supremacy all over the world, how it started, Greek attitudes, Roman attitudes, even the attitudes of semi-white people like the Arabs, who will separate custom from religion, things that you believe to be the truth that is really folklore. It's so difficult to get people to recognize that certain things were imposed on you that were alien to your society, that came out of other societies. And you accept these things, you're willing to kill each other over them. And there's a word of truth in it. All right, we don't have time for any form of chit-chat. The focus of my talk, all too short given the subject, the focus of the talk will be global white supremacy from the end of the 19th century to the middle of the 20th century and the African independence explosion. Now, what had happened at the end of the 19th century, African people all over the world had engaged in protracted revolutions and had given themselves something they need right now, something their children need right now, something all of them misinterpreted and removed from their memory. The longest revolutionary heritage of any people on the face of the earth. Giving up a true revolutionary heritage, they began to follow people who didn't know where they were going. They began to accept books called the Bible. They began to hear stories about the rescue of a Holy Grail. Number one, wasn't holy. Number two, wasn't lost. Number three, wasn't there in the first place. There is an essential myth through the life of most of the people in the world. Now, with the interpretation of the curricula as a feel-good curricula, the criticizers of our desire for a correct curricula have had nothing but a feel-good curriculum. But they don't want anyone else in the world to feel good. Now, if they stop telling lies about themselves and integrate our truth, maybe all of us can feel good together, and you have universal humanity other than global white supremacy. What the fight over the curricula is about their claiming things that they couldn't possibly have produced, because the things that they claim are older than their existence. It came up this morning on WWRL, a man or a lady, it called, reporting about some 12 gates. In the names of the 12 gates. Give me this name. Gates to the holy city. I said, that piece of presupposes that I believe the story in the first place. It also presupposes that I accept Jerusalem as the Holy Land. All right. And I do not. I have no Holy Land outside of the physical property of Africa. Right. So what you are calling Jerusalem and what you are calling the Middle East or Western Asia was once an African colony and an extension of Africa. Right. But the first holy city that the Africans declared or any other people declared in the whole world is Abydos. And that city is still there intact. Jerusalem has been destroyed several times. And Jerusalem was given to us out of someone else's folklore while we ignored the city we built with our own hands, still standing, not holy by us, because someone else told us another city was holy. Now, as we came down to the end of the 19th century, the Africans had been engaged in anti-colonial wars. Global white supremacy had manifested itself in the form of slavery. We had had 400 years of it by now. Europe had recovered at our expense. The products from Jamaica, Haiti, and other West Indian islands had restored the economy of Europe. South America, that mulatto continent, contributed very little to Europe then, contributed very little to Europe now. The race in between was in conflict with itself, not worth a conversation here, because these were want to be whites. I wish the hell I was whites, pretending that they are white. That's another lecture, another day. When I have enough strong men to protect me from the podium to the street where the car is running, to get me the hell out of here and keep me being killed, I will deliver the lecture on the role of the bastards in history. The people created by the coming together of blacks and whites who go through life, in most cases, debating whether they're loyal to their mother's people or their father's people, not knowing that every time they knock on their father's door, their father won't open the door, leaving them with no other door to come into but their mother's people's door. And yet, so many times they have no loyalty to their mother's house. In Africa, they had fought 100 years of colonial wars. These Africans who never wore a store-bought shoe or heard of a military school, in their fight against global white supremacy, had out-generaled some of the finest military minds of Europe. All right. Yeah. And whose word do we have for this? A young British reporter named Winston Churchill, in a book called The River War, dealing with the British retaking of the Sudan, and another one called A Roving Commissioner, dealing with the Boer War in South Africa. These Africans did not concede that anyone had the right to take over their country. So the Asante Wars in what is now Ghana, the wars along the East Coast, engineered, brought into being by Islam, Europe, after chattel slavery was turned into another form of slavery called colonialism, a more sophisticated kind of slavery and more profitable. You're less responsible for the upkeep of the slave, and yet he has no choice but to work with you because you destroyed his way of life. He must now survive by serving you. You torn down his trees, you killed his farm life, you laughed at his gods, you told him his clothes was ugly so he not wears your clothes. You reduced him to a vassal by demeaning his culture and demeaning him. Some traditional Africans who would not wear their clothes, adopt their taste, decided to fight. They did not go to London, to Whitehall Street. They did not go and laugh at the smiling lady under the chandelier. The minute the African went to London, saw a chandelier and had a cocktail in his hand, he was doomed. So global white supremacy was manifesting itself in many ways because they had produced a mechanism of control. Now, having controlled the body, they wanted to control the mental wealth of Africa. They knew then what you still do not know. Africa is and has always been the world's richest continent.
All right.
And we are a rich people who are poor because we have not understood our riches. That juvenile delinquent who came out of Europe shooting babies in the back and calling himself a superior man at least knew something about the African who befriended him. He knew that he was politically naive. At the end of the 19th century, the Africans had 100 years of fighting this supremacy. The European had created a literature trying to justify his superiority. This literature had to deal with the brain side, head measurement, a whole lot of things had absolutely no scientific basis. Doubt, people looking for the missing link. The missing link cannot be possibly found any place except in Europe. So they created a man in Europe, took a skeleton, buried the skeleton, dug it up. Didn't have any ancient history, so he got to create some. In the meantime, there were Europeans debunking all of this that no one paid any attention to, then or now. But in the closing years of the 19th century, there was a royal prostitute in Belgium named Leopold who had houses of joy in different capitals of Europe, and he was spending a whole lot of money on these houses because he kept them the year round and sometimes could use them about once or twice a year. He's looking around for capital. There are nations in Europe who did not get in on the slicing up of Africa. They would call a conference at Berlin where they would split up the rest of Africa, but all those got a little muscle, the Germans, got a big slice. The Germans got 4 nice pieces. Southwest Africa, now Namibia, the Cameroons, Togoland, now Togo, and Tanzania. They began almost a rehearsal for Nazism in Africa because the civilian governor of Southwest Africa was Jewish. The military governor was Herman Goering's father.
No.
If I didn't know what the documents, I wouldn't be saying it. Now, with these colonial wars being fought, African kings, so-called chiefs, been either driven into exile, driven to suicide, what do we got now? In the closing years of the 19th century, you got missionary-trained Africans who are now petitioning the European, appealing to his conscience, not knowing he had no conscience, where power is concerned. There's no conscience to appeal to. Thou shalt not, the religion that said thou shalt not was meant for you. He gave that to you. He didn't intend to obey it. Now after the Berlin Conference and France getting more colonial territory, Germany getting colonial territory, Belgium getting the big Congo, Portuguese getting a little piece, all of the gangsters agreed on the slice. No African attending. And at this conference, an American Stanford allegedly attended the conference, saying as his rationale that the Congo might one day be a place to settle American blacks. Abraham Lincoln went through that same charade. Now you want to know what would have happened had Abraham Lincoln not been shot. I'm sorry he got shot. Had he not been shot, he had a movement to get all of us out of here. Even to the corner of Brazil, any place, just get you out of here. And while he did not believe in slavery, because it was an unwieldy labor system, he didn't believe in your presence and said point blank, you will never be the social equal of a white person in any case. So while you are welcome celebrating Lincoln's birthday, do a little sobering thinking and read Lerone Bennett's famous article, Was Abraham Lincoln a white racist? He asked the question and he answered the question affirmatively. He was.
All right.
Now, as we come down to the end of the 19th century, Africa is shifting gears. The warriors are leaving the field. The missionary-trained African activists are moving on the field. In Ghana, a brilliant politician, E. Casely Hayford, is in charge of the youth. They exiled King Prempeh and his cousin, Ye Asantewaa, who led the last of the Shanti Wars. And these wars were really wars to maintain European control over Africa, therefore a part of global white supremacy. At this juncture, we see North Africa coming under the French. We see the Arab who's a colonizer and a slaver being colonized. We saw resistance coming within this whole structure. And yet we see an intellectual movement existing in Africa in reaction to the continuous presence of the Europeans. Along the coast of East Africa, Somalia, a man named Mohammed bin Abdullah Hassan, the British called the Mad Mullah, had fought the British up until about 1923. Along the coast of West Africa, the Asante Wars in Ghana had lasted from 1805 until 1900, when the Exile Asante War. After the Exile Asante War, Casely Hayford started a campaign for the return of the royal families and converted that campaign into a fight for independence. And when he died in 1931, he sent for a young student, Joseph B. Dunkwa, to send for J.P. and said, J.P., the mantle is yours. Joseph B. Dunkwa, in turn, had a young student under his wing called Francis K. Nkrumah. Right. Francis K. Nkrumah, after attending the Pan-African Conference of 1945 in Manchester, England, was broke and in London, and like a whole lot of Africans, eking out a mere existence, serving the unfulfilled British women. Sinclair Drake, unfortunately deceased now, he says, when we get together, he said, John, one of these days I'm going to tell a real story about these African heads of state and what they had to do to get along. I said, Sinclair, have another cocktail. Sinclair, have another cocktail. I'm going to tell a real story. He never, the real story. I'm glad he never told the real story. My main point is that Joseph B. Dunkwa sent for his former student that until the end of his days he addressed as Francis K. Nkrumah. He never called him Kwame, just like he was in the classroom. And Nkrumah, being brought home to take the mantle of leadership from Dunkwa, got impatient. And instead of waiting for the mantle to be handed to him traditionally, seized the mantle and led the country to independence. Had he waited for it 2 more years, it could have been done more peacefully. There could have been a mixture of tradition and modernism. It would have been a much better state with the infusion of traditional government. Now, we were now becoming a prize to be captured, because the land, the resources of Africa becoming a prize to be captured. Africans were now relating to Africans in the Caribbean and Africans in the United States. A great Caribbean figure, Edmund Blyden, had proclaimed and literally prophesied the concept of black studies in his inaugural address, Liberia College, 1881. He had already written his crowning masterpiece, deserved to be reread right now, Christianity, Islam, and the Negro Race. All of us are mixed up on all the subjects. We're mixed up on all forms of religion. We're mixed up on all forms of politics. The European was still justifying the domination of other people through politics. All right, now, we had at the end of the 19th century a better Pan-African network when it took 2 months for a letter to be delivered than we've got right now. People were not boasting of any island they came from. The Africans understood the artificial nature of the state divided by foreigners. Some of them understood the artificial nature of the religion imposed on them by foreigners. All of this was a form of global white supremacy. All over the world, it began to happen. It had reached Asia. In China, the Europeans had their own courts. In Shanghai, there was hotels. The Chinese and dogs not allowed. And some of the people who will spit on you now, were then being spit upon. All this is documented. Edgar Snow's work, another work called 400,000 Customers. The only Chinese woman that could go into one of the hotels had to be a prostitute or a cleaning woman. This kind of humiliation. The British had reduced an entire nation to dope, to opium. You think you can't survive crack? They were worse off than you ever was. If they survived it, you can survive it. Right on. But you ain't gonna survive unless you crack some head. In the 1880s, an admiral named Perry kicked open the door of Japan to trade with the West, whether you like it or not. No, it's earlier than that. The Japanese were minding their own business. The silkworm, making that beautiful kimono, wooden shoe. Didn't even have a decent wheelbarrow. Never heard of a Toyota or a Datsun. When people are asleep, sometimes it's best to leave them alone. Now, I'm going to show you what they did that you still got to do until you stop. Until you do it, you are jiving about independence, about freedom. A Japanese educator called in the youth of Japan and told them what had happened. And he sent them to the leading schools of the world, to get that information, get that technology. And if they smear that body waste in your face, apologize for having your face in the way. So he sent them to MIT. They went to military schools in the United States and wouldn't even let a black person sweep the floor. 2/3 of all the field officers that faced America in the Pacific War were trained in America. Every field officer practically trained. Virginia Military Academy was the main trainer. Black men is not even there, even now. My main point is that by 1905, the Japanese had learned enough to take on a European nation. And when the Russians started messing with them, they started kicking butt. And they defeated them.
Right.
And this shocked Europe so much until they began to propagate something called the Yellow Danger. This is the beginning and the basis of anti-Asianism. Manifests itself in the stereotypes in the movies. A Japanese detective called Mr. Moto, Fu Manchu, Charlie Chan. And what do we have? Step and fetch. That control over the movies. All of this is global white supremacy. That control, that colonization of the Bible, They're sitting down Sunday school lesson with all white angels. Every single thing that came out of the European mind was meant to facilitate his control over the world. He's got no hesitation about it.